Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, why this cartoonist wanted to change the way comics are told, the well-known comics she now creates. Plus, UMSL scientists recruit citizens to track and map the Cicada song. Hear what they found out. And then how St. Louis played a significant role in the approach to death and cremation. But first, meet a man from Missouri who created some very well-known Marvel characters. It's Sunday, and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
Deadpool, Venom, the X-Men. These characters from the Marvel Universe are titans in our popular culture today. Their fantastic storylines and adventures captivate millions of readers around the world. And they all spring from the mind of a writer located here in Missouri, Cullen Bunn. Cullen has been a writer of comic books, short stories, and novels for almost 20 years, and has become one of the most celebrated authors in his field during that time. Though he is now an established presence in the industry, he got his start through his own hard work and initiative, creating his own comic book before ever signing with a publisher. And his epic journey began from a simple boyhood dream, to be a storyteller.
Stories are just something that I've always wanted to tell. My dad was a natural-born storyteller, and I think I picked that up from him, and I always wanted to tell stories. I didn't care if that was going to be in comics or in short stories or novels or whatever. I didn't care the medium. I just wanted to tell stories. I was a voracious comic book reader, especially as a kid. There were a couple of books that I can point to that these books really inspired me and kind of told me that this is what I wanted to do. There was a book, it's based on a toy line called Micronauts that was written by Bill Mantlo. It was the first experience I had where I was really recognizing that the writer was doing so much world building. They were building story upon story upon story and just history and lore, and that just set a fire in me. I attended college with the intent of being a writer. So I did get a degree in creative writing from, at the time it was Southwest Missouri State. Now I think it's just Missouri State. A story is just a tale told from one person to another. The fallacy of it is a story is just something a storyteller presents, and that's not the case. The storyteller is always collaborating with the audience, because the audience will interpret that story and react to that story in different ways. So it's really, a story is a collaboration between the storyteller and the audience. First and foremost, it's always been very important to me that when people read my work, they just have fun doing it and they enjoy it. So my primary goal is to reach that enjoyment factor for the reader. My process is very outline driven. After I have the idea of what the story will be, and that could be just a line or two, it could be just a notion in my head. After I have that idea, I go through 3, 4, 5 outline stages. They could even read like fight, talk, run, fight, talk. I break down the story in how many pages I think that section of the story is going to be, and then I outline it again in a little more detail, and I outline it again in a little more detail. Outlining's pretty important just about in everything I do, but in comics in particular, it's essential, because comics, unlike a novel or a short story or a screenplay, everything is very regimented. I am restricted by the number of issues in a series, the number of pages in an issue, the number of panels on a page. So I really have to go through a lot of outlining before I ever get to the actual scripting process, or I get myself into a lot of trouble. So by the time I'm actually sitting down to script a comic, I know everything that's going to happen on every panel of that issue. Becoming a comic book writer is different for everyone. For me, it took me a long time to actually get my foot in the door with a publisher and have my first work published. The best advice I could give someone who wants to break in as a comic book writer is just create a comic book. And that sounds kind of like a cheat, but it's true, especially now. There shouldn't be a gatekeeper stopping you from creating a comic book. Go out there, find an artist, learn to draw yourself, whatever it takes, and get a comic book made. If your goal is to work for Marvel or DC or something like that, you can still use your creator-owned stuff to introduce yourself to those publishers. But I certainly would not advise people to wait for a publisher to give them permission to create something.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
I always say that the best way to learn how to draw a comic is to draw a comic. When I started drawing, I was reading a lot of webcomics, and I wanted to do my own webcomic as well. There are so many different kinds of comics that the comics industry is really a lot bigger than just the part that most people see. A lot of people assume that the comic book industry is really male-dominated, but if you are a part of the industry, you can see that it is very much 50-50, if not more, leaning towards women. And that's one of the things that really inspired me. So with Elements Fire, I got to decide what they looked like and their mannerisms and how they interact with others. And I decided that I wanted, everyone in there to be a person of color, because white people aren't the only people that have adventures. And I see so many stories that involve people of color, and it's always about the struggle, having to deal with racism, and it's like, that's really not all that we deal with. I really focus on trying to create a story and a character from their body movements, what kind of clothes they wear. I just try and pick a little bit of what is in their universe that makes them who they are. The original creator of Heart of the City, Mark Tatulli, was retiring. They wanted to continue, but also change it so that it was more for a readership for today, a more modern audience. Now I do Heart of the City full-time, and that is a daily comic that you can get in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I know with Heart in particular, she's precocious and rambunctious, and I wanted to find a way to take that, because when Mark was doing it, she was a little girl, 6 or 7, but take that and move it into the middle school area. What happens when you take that aggressive kind of personality and put it in middle school? How do people react to it? How does she think about not just her relationship with her best friend, but her best friend's relationship with their other best friend, and what does her living space look like, and living with her mom, being a single mother. So I really just have to kind of imagine who is this person and what in their life makes them who they are, and try and get that across in 4 panels. So I have to really try and find a way to take an idea and simplify it down enough so that it can be on the page, but also clear enough that people understand what that is. And that's really what cartooning is about. It's about taking something big, an idea, and making it a lot clearer. The idea of being nervous, of being anxious, is kind of a big idea, but what are some of the things that you do when you're nervous? Do you bite your nails? Do you sweat? Do you look to the left or to the right? And so you have to pick, well, which one of those works better for this scene? So let's say I'm doing a strip for Heart of the City. I actually write all of the Heart of the City stories months and months ahead of time, so that when I'm actually drawing them, I'm just pulling from stuff that I've already written. Then I'll do these roughs. So they're basically just really messy ideas of what's going to go on the strip. They're basically just placements, those roughs. The inks is really my favorite part, because it's really more of solidifying the pencils that you've already done. You really want to get something that you see in your mind, but getting on paper, it's difficult. I think you can tell stories with all different kinds of art styles, and it's really about how you use the art to really evoke a feeling or get an idea across. I like to think that I pick and pull from all kinds of people, you know? So the way I draw eyes comes from some person, or the way I color comes from another, you know? So I think it just kind of is an amalgamation of all the things that I'm interested in. I can't think of any comic creator that doesn't want there to be comics 70 years from now, you know? And so if we want that to happen, we have to make sure that the landscape is good enough for everyone else to come into. So that's what I hope that I'm doing.
HEC Media, bringing you culture and community. Find all of HEC's positive programming and award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
As thoughts of summer fade away, they're replaced by everything fall. But when raking leaves or cleaning out flower beds, cicada carcasses bring back memories of the summer of the historic cicada emergence. And some scientists in the St. Louis area took the opportunity to study the summer of the 2024 double emergence. They review the evidence and share the discoveries.
Total shock to us. Like, we weren't finding cicadas throughout most of North St. Louis. We weren't finding them in areas of the city that were quite old. And then just to find tons of them in this very new forest. Igo, a housing development that is a sort of notorious project development as a just giant social experiment failure that took place more than 50 years ago. There's been quite a forest that has sort of developed in the area where the project was taken down, and it's filled with cicadas. And it has served as sort of a source population for recolonizing parts of North St. Louis.
This is a surprise because in other parts of North St. Louis City, it was cicada silent.
Especially in these older portions of the city where we would have sort of continual development almost from when the city was founded. So these periodic cicadas have these really long 13-year life cycles. They need to be in a habitat that's not disturbed over those 13 years.
For a better understanding of the history and ecology, the University of Missouri's St. Louis entomologist dived into cicada research.
We were interested in sort of this intersectionality of the history of the development of St. Louis with where cicadas are or are not.
Assistant Professor Sarah Miller explains how they conducted their research in a new and creative way. They recruited all willing citizens in the greater St. Louis area to be involved in the project using an app. This would help UMSL researchers who were going out into the communities and green spaces in St. Louis to cover even more ground.
Oh, well, we have this double emergence cicada natural history event, so maybe this is also a way to get people who would otherwise not be as interested or excited about insects. So we managed to get more than 800 observations. I had emails. It's just been really gratifying to see people so excited about insects.
It became quite an accomplishment for cicada mapping.
My colleague Amy Dunlap and myself developed the cicada mapping project. Use your phone and spend 3 minutes looking around and using your eyes and ears to assess the number of cicadas that were there. We use this phone app that records sound intensity, and so we use that as sort of one measure. So when they're really loud, cicadas would make a lot of noise. And then we also asked people to sort of count the number of cicadas that they could see as well, with the hope that, you know, being able to spend 3 minutes would be really quick and easy, and we can get a bunch of people to collect a lot of data. So what were the distribution, and can we say anything about how the development of the St. Louis region interacts? A phenomenon that differed a lot for where you were in the city.
The study showed the importance of green spaces.
Using Lafayette Square Park as an example, there's this giant old park in the center, so kind of served as almost an island or a reservoir for cicadas. What we are finding is that there is probably some sort of socioeconomic component to this.
And in this failed public housing space, grown over from long ago, Miller says the success of cicadas is unexpected and fascinating.
It was such an urbanized environment to sort of find this pocket of habitats in Pruitt, Igo, and then grow to such high densities and then start recolonizing the city was a surprise.
But with any possibility of redeveloping the property, the cicada's future is uncertain.
We suspect maybe in 13 years, a lot of that forest, or maybe all of that forest, may be converted to new housing developments. And so what will happen to the cicadas then? Cicadas are not of conservation concern, so they're really great for ecosystems.
Overall, studying cicadas helped with this lab's mission.
It has received less attention, but we are actually in an insect biodiversity crisis at the moment. So insects as a whole are not doing very well. The numbers are declining. We don't really know why. And we are not studying them. They don't receive as much attention. And so the way that cicadas can help us is that they're a way of getting people excited about insects.
Later on Spotlight, another blip blap song you're sure to enjoy. History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. The Missouri Crematory, which opened in the 1880s just south of Sublette Park in St. Louis, was the first crematory west of the Mississippi and marked a shift in attitudes toward death. Public historian Amanda Clark explores its significant role in the evolution of St. Louis's approach to death and cremation.
Just to the south of Sublette Park in St. Louis City stands the beautiful and historic Missouri Crematory. When it opened in the 1880s, it was the first crematory west of the Mississippi River, and it reflects shifting social norms surrounding death in the late 19th century. Cremation is an ancient practice and common in many societies throughout the world. In Western cultures, however, the rise of Christianity brought the emphasis on earth burial. In the mid-19th century, a modern cremation movement began to spread, and the first crematory in the U.S. opened in 1876 in Pennsylvania. The Missouri Crematory was only the 6th in the country, and it was the first west of the Mississippi. It was also the first of the modern era to include a columbarium, which is a building for the storage of urns. As 19th century cities grew larger and larger and deadly diseases made human remains suspect, it became commonplace for cemeteries and their inhabitants to be moved to make way for urban land use. In St. Louis, for example, today's Benton Park was originally used as City Cemetery No. 1. The arguments for cremation answered several of these concerns. It was seen as more sanitary and it saved on space. The 19th century also saw a huge rise in spiritualism, or the belief that the living can contact and interact with the spirit world. This made the body less of an issue. The Missouri Crematory was built by a man named Allen Todd, who unfortunately died before it was ready to use. However, the first cremation to take place was for his daughter, Elizabeth Todd Terry. When she died in 1888, her remains were first buried in Bellefontaine Cemetery, but then taken to the crematory when it was ready. Her cremation was front-page news for the Post-Dispatch, with every single detail of the process explained. This helped remove the veil of mystery around the practice, and the shift in perception began. Today, well over 50% of people choose cremation. Missouri Crematory had several high-profile cremations throughout its history, including Frank James, the brother to the famous outlaw Jesse James. Today, it is being modernized to perform aqua cremation. It continues to be a part of St. Louis's death history.
Next week on History Spotlight, why engineers didn't believe that this spectacular St. Louis bridge would stand.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
Just down the street from Soulard Market, this mid-19th century home had sat vacant for 40 years until it was donated to Landmarks Association of St. Louis. The preservation advocacy group, led by Executive Director Andrew Weil, has transformed the building into their new headquarters.
Back in the 1970s, Landmarks Association was actually involved in a number of rehabilitation projects in Soulard as demonstration projects to show that these buildings could be adapted for modern use. So we've kind of come back to our roots.
Many notable sites, like the old post office and the Wainwright building, have been rescued from oblivion by the group. But their most sweeping contribution to the city was the creation of the National Register of Historic Districts, along with their involvement in framing Missouri's Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program.
That has had enormous impact on stabilizing neighborhoods that were sliding and were being disinvested in, and also in stabilizing and improving the tax base. The school system and the public services benefit from that.
With their acquisition of the site in Soulard, Landmarks embraced the opportunity to give an old building a new purpose. In return, the house began to reveal some fascinating insight into its evolution from a one-room stone cottage to a multi-family dwelling.
This is a theory, but I believe that the original component of this building, the little stone cottage, was built by the Soulard's agricultural workers or their slaves, they were slave owners, as a shelter so that they could come out and work on this land, harvesting firewood, probably collecting walnuts and hickory nuts, and probably running hogs out here, possibly cattle. It also had a very, very deep cellar. Another theory there is that with the proximity to the river, that it may have been being used as an ice house. So they could come out in the wintertime, they'd cut ice, bring it up here, store it in that cellar.
In the 1840s, the Soulards sold the property to the Hesches, a German family who, like hundreds of thousands of others, had recently immigrated to St. Louis from Europe. And space was at a premium.
The Hesches got right to work and took the little stone cottage, lopped the roof off of it, added a second floor, and then built this house and the alley house behind us. By the turn of the late 19th century, there were upwards of 30 plus people living in this complex. This was a two-family space with a dividing wall between. So each family on the second floor and the first floor would have had one room and one fireplace, and that was it.
Every space, from the dirt floor cellar to the sweltering attic, was filled with people, and all of them dependent upon one lone outhouse in the courtyard, which was located right next to the water cistern.
It's a wonder, in quotes, that we had such problems with, cholera and other waterborne diseases because they put these facilities right next to each other and the water would pass between them. This courtyard would have really been the center of household activity, especially in the summer and hotter months. And you can imagine the clotheslines going across the courtyard, kids playing, and probably chickens, cooking to a certain extent.
The courtyard may have provided relief from the cramped quarters inside, but it presented major logistical challenges as crews navigated the small area to dig, put in sewer lines, and pour concrete. Another significant issue were the crumbling walls.
P.T. Barnum said there's no such thing as bad publicity. If the front wall of this building had fallen onto the Mardi Gras parade, I think that would have been bad publicity.
A major reason for the structural instability was the strange hodgepodge of bricks. Some were sturdy and hard-fired, made to withstand the elements, but these were mixed in with softer bricks that were meant only for interior use.
I believe that part of that is because of the 1896 tornado. The church across the street, we have historic photos of that, was almost completely knocked over. I can't imagine that this building didn't sustain damage. So you can imagine people going around with wheelbarrows and rebuilding their homes with the bricks that they can, get their hands on. 120 years later, that causes problems because the bricks are weathering at different rates.
To solve this problem, a whole new internal structure was built, then covered with bricks to preserve the original style of the building.
So we started and worked off a photo from the 1890s for the guys to measure from and make sure we hit the number of bricks so that everything lined up the way it did before.
But when it came to expanding on the existing space, the addition was given a modern twist to identify it as new.
Plenty of light coming in with all the glass and aluminum, and it's just a nice contrast to the age of the building.
The restoration of the Soulard House has been a labor of love, and its reclaimed value as both a usable structure and as a time capsule of 19th century St. Louis perfectly demonstrates the mission of the organization that now calls it home. The space will feature a public architecture library, reading room, and free educational programs sponsored by the Regional Arts Commission.
This building itself, we've made a conscious effort to leave things visible in different places so we can talk about how the structure works and what some of the technologies were that went into it.
And in a historic district like Soulard, the lesson can naturally extend into the streets, into that same neighborhood Landmarks Association helped to transform almost 50 years ago.
Being able to just walk out the front door with a school group or a continuing education group and walk around and encourage people to see the museum that they're living in, you know. But it's not a museum under glass, it's a museum that supports a vibrant community.
Go to hecmedia.org for the arts and authors,
Completely accidental because I never set out to write a book.
science and history, culture and community,
It's considered to be the oldest organic farm west of the Mississippi.
education, films,
Finding the coin places the site firmly in the 13th century.
what's happening now around St. Louis, and more. See for yourself at hecmedia.org.
Sometimes I wish all the hard times, all the hard times, all the hard times would wash away, fade in the lives, in the lives, in the lives. I don't know how to say, but I know I wanna say it soon. Don't know why it happened, why it's happening to you. Counting ghosts in the trees in the daylight, they look sad. She caught in the breeze and the night was all they had. Oh, she caught in the breeze and the night was all they had. Sometimes I wish all the hard times, all the hard times, all the hard times.
Next week, we'll give you a preview of some of the fall fairs and markets coming to town. Plus, a marine biologist who looks to sharks for life advice. Find out what you learn. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.